I'm 58 years old now, and if you're watching this, you might think I look calm, collected, maybe even wise. But it took me a lifetime to get here. For 3 decades, I thought I was living the dream: life-stable marriage, children, a modest but comfortable home. And then, at 58, I discovered the truth. My husband had been hiding not just a secret, but a fortune, and worse. That fortune came wrapped in betrayal that almost destroyed me. But before I tell you about that bombshell, let me take you back to where it all started. Because the way I survived, the way I turned my world around, came from lessons I learned long before I ever fell in love. I was born in 1965 in a small Midwest town called Maple Hollow. We weren't wealthy. Dad worked at the local mill, his hands permanently stained with oil, his back bent from long shifts. Mom ran a tiny sewing business out of the house, fixing torn hems and stitching prom dresses for girls who wanted something fancier than the department store could offer. We lived in a little blue house at the edge of town with peeling paint, a sagging porch, and a yard full of dandelions. Money was always tight. I remember Mom cutting coupons at the kitchen table, glasses slipping down her nose, saying, "A penny saved is a penny earned, sweetheart. Don't ever forget it." Dad's lesson was tougher. He'd say, "Work like no one's coming to save you," because most of the time, they're not. Those words stuck. I grew up scrappy, always hustling. At 10, I babysat for neighbors. At 12, I bagged groceries at the local market. By 16, I was saving for my own car, even if it was a rusted old Ford that coughed more than it drove. My friends used to tease me for being so serious. But I knew what I wanted: independence. And then one autumn day, I met Richard. He was standing by his dad's pickup truck, leaning against the hood with that half-smile boys perfect when they know they're handsome. He was 2 years older, already working part-time at his uncle's gas station. His hair was sandy blonde, his eyes the kind of blue that reminded me of summer skies. I was 16. He was 18. And from that day on, he was all I could think about. Richard had charm. He knew how to make you feel like the only person in the room. At school dances, he'd spin me around like we were in some fancy ballroom instead of a sweaty gym with crepe paper streamers. He'd slip me notes during study hall, little doodles of hearts and R+M. My parents weren't thrilled. Mom thought he was too flashy, too smooth. "Pretty boys bring pretty troubles," she warned. Dad just grunted, which was his way of agreeing. But when you're 16, warnings sound like dares. And Richard was a dare I couldn't resist. By the time I turned 19, Richard had proposed. We didn't have matcha rented hall in the basement of the Methodist church, a cake my aunt baked, a borrowed dress from a cousin. But when I looked into his eyes and he said, "For better or worse," I believed him. I truly did. The first years of marriage were lean. Richard bounced between jobs mechanic, delivery driver, salesman. I worked as a secretary for a small insurance office, typing on an old IBM typewriter that jammed more than it worked. But we made it. We scrimped, saved, and slowly carved out a life by our 5th anniversary. We had bought a modest home, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen so small you had to turn sideways to open the fridge. But it was ours. I painted the walls myself, choosing sunny yellows and warm creams, determined to make it feel like a place where love lived. We had 2 children. Emily, our firstborn, came screaming into the world with a head full of dark hair and lungs that could rival a fire alarm. 3 years later came Daniel, quieter, more thoughtful, with wide brown eyes that seemed to soak in the world. Motherhood was everything to me. I gave up my office job and threw myself into raising them. Richard was working as a salesman for a car dealership by then, often gone long hours. Sometimes he'd come home smelling like whiskey, brushing it off with a laugh. Just one with the guys after closing a deal. I wanted to believe him. I did. There were cracks, but back then, I chalked them up to the stress of life. Richard was charming, yes, but also quick-tempered. He could light up a room with his smile, but he could just as quickly darken it with his silence. He had a way of making me feel like I was overreacting whenever I raised concerns. Still, life rolled on. The kids grew. Emily blossomed into a bright, ambitious young woman who dreamed of becoming a teacher. Daniel was quieter, more artistic, always sketching or strumming on his guitar. I was proud of them, proud of the family I thought we had built. Then, in my early 40s, my parents passed within 2 years of each other. Losing them was like losing the roots that anchored me. I remember standing in their empty house, the sewing machine still on the table, Dad's work boots by the door, and feeling like the world had tilted. Richard wasn't much comfort. He patted my shoulder, told me life goes on, and went back to watching football. That was the first time I really felt the loneliness creeping in. But still, I carried on. That's what women do, isn't it? We carry on. By the time I turned 50, our kids were grown. Emily had married a kind man named Paul and moved to towns over. Daniel was in college, still finding himself, but with a good heart. I should have been content. But deep down, I felt tired. Tired of holding everything together. Tired of being the steady rock while Richard seemed to drift through life on his terms. Then came the little oddities. Bank statements that didn't quite add up. Richard taking business trips that didn't match the dealership schedule. A new suit I didn't recognize charged on our credit card. I asked questions, but Richard always had an answer, slick, confident, dismissive. "Don't worry your pretty head about it," he'd say, kissing my forehead like I was a child at first. I doubted myself. Was I being paranoid? Suspicious. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. One evening, while Richard was in the shower, I sorted through the mail. There was a thick envelope addressed to him from a law firm I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were legal documents, words I didn't fully understand at first. But the gist was clear. Richard was listed as the beneficiary of an inheritance. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the room spinning. The inheritance wasn't recent. It was dated nearly 10 years earlier. 10 years, and he hadn't breathed a word to me. I told myself maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was small. But tucked inside was a financial statement, and the number on that page made my breath catch. It wasn't small. It was millions, millions, and he had kept it hidden all this time. My world shifted in that instant. Suddenly, every late night, every unexplained trip, every distant look hit all made sense. And yet it didn't. Because what kind of man hides something like that from the woman he vowed to share his life with? I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I folded the documents back into the envelope, tucked it under the bills, and pretended nothing had happened. But inside, I was shaking. Betrayal has a way of hollowing you out. You smile, you nod, but inside you're unraveling. That night, lying beside him, listening to his steady breathing, I stared at the ceiling and thought, "Who are you, Richard? Who have I been married to all these years?" And that was just the beginning. Because what I would soon discover was that the inheritance wasn't the only secret. It was just the first crack in a dam about to burst, flooding my entire life with truths I wasn't ready for. The next few weeks felt like I was living in someone else's skin. Outwardly, I went through the motions, cooking dinners, calling Emily, checking in on Daniel, even folding Richard's shirts fresh from the dryer. But inside, I was a storm. I kept hearing Mom's words in my head. Pretty boys bring pretty troubles. Oh, how right she had been. I couldn't focus on anything but that envelope. At night, when Richard snored softly beside me, I'd sneak out of bed, open the drawer where I'd hidden it, and reread the papers. The numbers never changed. The date never changed. It had been sitting there for nearly a decade. Why didn't he tell me? Didn't he trust me? Or worse, did he not want me to share in it? My heart twisted with possibilities. Maybe he had debts. Maybe he was gambling. Maybe there was another woman. Each theory cut deeper than the last. I knew I couldn't live in the shadows of questions forever. So one Saturday morning, while Richard poured his coffee and settled in with the sports section, I sat across from him at the table. My hands shook as I laid the envelope down between us. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. His eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to me. For a split second, I saw something in his expression: fear, guilt, before he smoothed it over with that charming smile I had once fallen for. "Where did you get that?" he asked lightly, like I had stumbled upon an old yearbook. "It came in the mail." He sipped his coffee, calm as could be. "Oh, that. Nothing to worry about." "Nothing to worry about," I snapped. "Richard, it's millions of dollars. You've known about this for 10 years and you never thought to tell your wife?" He set the mug down, leaned back in his chair. "I didn't want to complicate things. Money changes people, Mary. It ruins marriages. I was protecting us. It's protecting us." The words rang hollow. My chest burned. "Protecting us," I whispered. "Or protecting yourself." For the first time, his smile faltered. He stood towering over me and muttered, "This is exactly why I didn't tell you. I knew you'd make it a problem." And just like that, he walked out, leaving me at the table with the truth spread between us. That was the moment something inside me cracked wide open. I realized I had spent 30 years building a life with a man who saw me as a bystander, not a partner. Over the next months, the cracks widened. I noticed how often he was working late, how his phone never left his side, how his laughter on the other end of a call didn't sound like the laughter he gave me anymore. I started digging. At first, small things, checking credit card statements, noting withdrawals, calling the dealership to confirm his schedule. Then bigger things, looking up the law firm's name, cross-referencing property records at the county office. That's when I found it. A deed to a condo in the city, purchased in cash 5 years earlier. Not in both our names. Not even in his. It was under a trust, but one signed by him. I drove there one afternoon while he was on a trip. My hands clutched the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The condo building was modern, sleek, far nicer than anything we had ever owned. I waited in the car, heart pounding, until I saw them dot Richard and a woman. She was maybe in her early 40s, with glossy dark hair, a tailored dress, heels that clicked against the pavement. She laughed at something he said, then looped her arm through his as they walked inside like they'd done it 1,000 times before. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it had collapsed. I wanted to scream, to run, to pound on the glass doors and demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I drove home in silence, my hands numb on the wheel, tears blurring the road. That night, Richard returned home as if nothing had happened. He kissed my cheek, asked what was for dinner. And I played along because I needed time. Time to think. Time to plan. Because if there's one thing life had taught me from clipping coupons with Mom to working double shifts as a teenager, it's that survival requires strategy. And I wasn't about to let Richard's betrayal destroy me. I started documenting everything, quietly, carefully. I opened a separate bank account in my name only. I made copies of the inheritance papers, the deed, the bank statements. I hid them in a folder labeled recipes in the pantry. Knowing Richard never set foot there, I also started taking stock of myself. For years, I had poured everything into being wife and mother. But who was I beyond that? Could I survive on my own? The answer came unexpectedly one afternoon when Emily called. She was struggling with her teaching job, frustrated by outdated lesson plans and students who weren't connecting. "Mom, you always knew how to explain things in a way that made sense." She sighed. Something clicked in me. I had always been good at teaching, whether it was helping Emily with her spelling tests or Daniel with his guitar chords. Maybe I had a skill after all that night. While Richard dozed in front of the TV, I opened my laptop and started researching. Online tutoring, virtual teaching platforms. I set up a simple profile offering to tutor kids in English and history. At first, it was just a trickle one student here, another there. But slowly, it grew. And with each lesson, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. I didn't tell Richard. He wouldn't have cared, or worse, he'd have tried to sabotage it. But in the quiet of my room, headphones on, teaching a 12-year-old how to write an essay, I felt alive again. The final straw came one evening when Daniel, home from college, found me crying in the kitchen. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked, his face full of worry. I couldn't tell him the whole truth, not yet. So I just said, sometimes people aren't who you think they are, sweetheart. He hugged me tightly, whispering, "You're stronger than you think, Mom." His words lit a fire in me. Stronger than I think. Maybe I was. A month later, I confronted Richard again. This time, I was ready. "I know about the condo," I said calmly, sliding the deed across the table. His face drained of color. For once, he had no slick answer. "Who is she?" I asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Finally, he muttered, "It's complicated." Complicated. I snapped. "You've been living a double life, Richard, with money that was supposed to be ours." His jaw clenched. "You don't understand." "No," I said firmly. "I do understand. I understand you betrayed me. You lied to me, and you thought I'd never find out. But guess what? I did." Silence. Thick, heavy silence. That night he slept in the guest room. The next morning he left early and didn't come back until late. We barely spoke for weeks. But something in me had shifted. I wasn't the broken woman staring at the ceiling anymore. I was planning my future. Because betrayal may shatter your heart, but it can also sharpen your vision. And that was just the beginning of my fight back. Because soon, I would discover that Richard's betrayal went deeper than I could have ever imagined, and that I'd have to use every ounce of wisdom, every lesson from my past, to survive what came next. The days after confronting Richard were strangely quiet, almost eerie. We lived in the same house, shared the same roof, but it felt like two strangers coexisting in silence. I cooked meals. He ate without a word. I folded laundry. He carried it to the guest room. At night, the sound of his footsteps retreating down the hallway became the new rhythm of my evenings. Oddly enough, the silence gave me strength. I wasn't trying to patch things up or force him to talk. For once, I wasn't begging to be seen. I was simply existing on my own terms, and little by little, it gave me clarity. I kept tutoring, expanding from a few kids to a steady stream of students. Word spread fast, parents recommended me, and soon I had more clients than I could handle. I created lesson plans, tracked progress, even had students from other states logging in. The small payments I earned started to add up, for the first time in years. I had money in my own account that no one could take from me. But money wasn't the only thing I was building. I was building confidence. One evening, as I was wrapping up a lesson, Emily called. She had a bright excitement in her voice that I hadn't heard in months. "Mom, guess what? The school board asked me to lead a new program. It's extra work, but I feel like I can handle it. And honestly, I think watching you do your tutoring gave me courage. You're showing me it's never too late to start something new." Her words nearly broke me. After all the shame and pain of Richard's betrayal, here was my daughter telling me that I was inspiring her. "Sweetheart," I said softly, tears filling my eyes, "you have no idea how much that means to me." It was in that moment I realized something important. Even when life drags you through betrayal, you can still choose how you rise. But Richard wasn't letting go so easily. One Saturday afternoon, I was preparing a lesson plan when he walked into the kitchen unannounced. His tie was loosened, his face flushed like he'd been drinking. "We need to talk," said. I braced myself, quotes, "Mary, you're blowing this out of proportion. The condo, the inheritance, it doesn't mean I don't love you." "Richard," I said evenly, "love doesn't hide condos. Love doesn't lie for 10 years. His eyes narrowed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Don't forget everything you have is because of me." That struck a nerve. For years, I had believed that his paycheck kept the lights on, his career provided the life we had. But now, looking at him, I realized it wasn't true. I had built this family. I had raised our children, supported him through his career, sacrificed my own dreams so his could thrive. And now, I was creating my own future, so I said the words I'd been holding in for weeks. "No, Richard, everything we had was because of us. But you chose to make it just about you." His jaw clenched. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. I sank into a chair, trembling, but a strange sense of relief washed over me. I wasn't scared anymore. The turning point came a week later when a letter arrived in the mail. It was addressed to Richard. But the return label caught my eye. It was from a law firm I hadn't seen before. Against my better judgment, I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was a statement showing a transfer of funds, large sums from Richard's inheritance. Trust into an account linked to the condo's address. But what chilled me to the bone was the name on the account, not the woman I had seen with him. No, it was a child's name. My heart raced. Could it be? Questions flooded me. Did Richard have another family? Another child he'd been supporting all this time? The thought made me physically ill. I staggered to the sink, splashed water on my face, tried to breathe that evening. When Richard returned, I confronted him. Who is she? I demanded. The woman at the condo. And don't you dare tell me it's complicated. He froze. His lips tightened. Finally, he muttered, she's someone I knew before. The child is mine. The air left my lungs. All those years. All those nights I spent alone thinking he was working late. He had been living another life, fathering another child. All while I raised ours alone. I felt like my heart had shattered into a million pieces. Mary, he pleaded, it didn't mean I stopped loving you. I couldn't abandon them. The audacity. He had abandoned me. He had abandoned the truth. Get out, I whispered. Get out of this house. And for once, he didn't argue. He packed a bag and left. The days that followed were the hardest of my life. I wandered the house like a ghost, touching the walls we had painted together, the furniture we had picked out, the family photos lining the shelves. But slowly, something inside me began to shift. Yes, Richard had betrayed me. Yes, my marriage had collapsed under the weight of lies. But I was still here. Still standing, I threw myself into tutoring. I expanded into adult education, helping women in their 40s and 50s brush up on job skills, write resumes, even learn how to use technology. My little side hustle was becoming a lifeline, not just for me, but for others too. One evening, after finishing a class, sat back and realized this is who I was meant to be all along. Not just Richard's wife, not just Emily and Daniel's mom, but Mary, a woman who could teach, guide, and uplift others. It wasn't easy. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, days when the loneliness felt unbearable. But every time I faltered, I reminded myself I've survived worse. And in surviving, I was becoming stronger than I ever imagined. Because betrayal may break you open, but it also lets the light in. And I wasn't done yet. Because soon, I would discover that Richard's betrayal wasn't just about another woman or another child. No, it was much bigger than that. And the fight for my future was only just beginning. The morning Richard left the house for good, I stood at the window and watched his car disappear down the driveway. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel relief. I felt hollow, as if 30 years of my life had been swept out with him. But here's the thing about hollowness: it leaves room to be filled again, and I was determined not to let that emptiness be filled with bitterness. I poured myself into my work. The tutoring business blossomed faster than I could have dreamed. Parents recommended me. Adult learners came to me with nervous smiles and left with confidence. And for the first time in decades, I felt like I was standing on my own 2 feet. One evening, Emily came by after work. She set a box of donuts on the table and said, "Mom, I want to show you something." She pulled out her phone and opened a draft for a website. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Mary's Learning Haven." "It's time," she said with a grin. "You need to take this online. Virtual classes, downloadable resources, the whole deal. You're already doing it. Let's make it official." I blinked at her, overwhelmed. "You really think I can?" She took my hand. "Mom, you've survived betrayal, heartbreak, and starting over at nearly 60. If anyone can, it's you." And in that moment, I realized my daughter wasn't just watching me rebuild. She was learning how to rebuild herself. too. But life wasn't done testing me. A few weeks later, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. This time, it wasn't a letter. It was a summons. Richard was suing me. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. He was demanding access to our shared accounts, the house, even a portion of the business I'd built since he left. His lawyer argued that since we were still legally married, he had rights to our assets. I felt sick. The nerve of that man. After years of hiding millions, funding another family, and lying to me, he wanted more. I called a lawyer, a woman named Cynthia, who came highly recommended. She was sharp, confident, and tough as nails. "Mary," she said after I told her everything, "don't panic. He may have had secrets, but the law doesn't take kindly to deceit. We'll fight this." 4 months. We went back and forth in court. Richard sat across the room, smug in his expensive suit, while I sat with Cynthia, clutching my notebook full of receipts, bank statements, and evidence of my business income. At times, I wanted to give up. The legal fees were draining, the stress overwhelming. But every time I looked at Richard, I remembered the years I had spent invisible. The lies I had endured, the betrayal I had survived. I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for my dignity. The turning point came when Cynthia presented evidence of the trust transfers, the ones Richard had used to fund the condo and the secret child's expenses. The judge's face darkened as he reviewed the documents. "Mr. Lawson," the judge said sternly, "you deliberately concealed assets from your wife. That will not work in your favor here." Richard's smug smile faltered. In the end, the ruling was clear. I retained full ownership of the house, my business, and half of the remaining marital assets. Richard was ordered to pay spousal support until the divorce was finalized. I walked out of that courthouse with my head held high, not because of the money, but because, for the first time in years, I had stood up for myself and with the settlement secured. I decided to do something radical. I didn't buy new clothes or a fancy car. I didn't take a vacation or upgrade my kitchen. Instead, I started a foundation. It was called New Beginnings for Women Over 50. Its mission was simple: to help women like me, women blindsided by divorce, betrayal, or loss, find their footing again. We offered workshops, small business grants, and mentorship programs. The first meeting was held in the church basement. 10 women showed up. They were nervous, guarded, carrying stories of pain etched in their faces. But as I spoke, telling them about Richard, the inheritance, the lies, and how I had started over, I saw something flicker in their eyes: hope. By the end of the meeting, we were laughing, crying, and making plans for what came next. Word spread. Soon, our meetings grew from 10 women to 30, then 50. I partnered with local organizations, secured donations, and eventually opened a small office downtown. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving and in helping others. I healed myself. The most unexpected moment came a year later. Standing at the registration table of one of our workshops when a woman approached me. She looked nervous, clutching her purse tightly. "Mrs. Lawson," she asked softly. I turned and my breath caught. It was her. The woman from the condo. The one Richard had betrayed me with. She looked older, up close, worn down by life. Her hands trembled as she said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know he was still married to you. He told me you were separated." Swallowed hard. For years, I had imagined this moment. I thought I would rage, scream, or maybe collapse in tears. Instead, I felt calm. "You don't owe me an apology," I said. Richard made his choices. So did I, and now I choose to move forward. Tears filled her eyes. She whispered, "Thank you," and walked away. I stood there, realizing something powerful. Forgiveness isn't for the other person. It's for you. Years later, people sometimes ask me if I regret marrying Richard. The answer is complicated. I regret the lies, the betrayal, the wasted years. But I don't regret the lessons, because those lessons taught me that no matter how badly someone tries to break you, you can always rebuild. At 58, I thought my life was ending. At 60, I realized it was just beginning now. When I look in the mirror, I don't see a broken woman. I see a survivor, a teacher, a leader. And if you're watching this, let me tell you, no matter your age, no matter your scars, your story isn't over. You still have chapters left to write. So here's my closing thought. From one woman to another, betrayal doesn't define you. What you do after it does. I turned my husband's secret inheritance into my own kind of wealth, a wealth of wisdom, freedom, and purpose. And that, my friends, is the greatest revenge of all.